You've caught me in the midst of doing dishes. It's really an ordinary thing that we find ourselves doing all the time. We also find ourselves doing ordinary things and we think nothing of it. What's the big deal? It's just something I always do. If you were a teacher, you may say, it's just something I do every day. Or pastors, I do it every day. There's nothing big about it. In this presentation, we're going to look at three individuals who did what many would consider to be ordinary things. But they were in extraordinary circumstances and extraordinary times. And what we find is that God takes the ordinary and brings out the extraordinary in those moments. The lives of Joanna P. Moore of Virginia Broughton and Masahiko Wada, teachers and pastor, what they did they may have described as ordinary. Something as normal as doing the dishes. But they did it in a way that was really just extraordinary. Let's enjoy this next part about Joanna Moore while I finish the dishes.
Joanna P. Moore was born in Clarendon County, Pennsylvania in 1832. As she grew, she went into a vocation of being a teacher. But in 1852, she went to a Baptist revival, joined the Baptist movement. And in 1854, she heard a sermon from the missionary Reverend Sewell Osgood. And that sermon compelled her, pushed her to go into mission work. And she originally felt this call to go into foreign mission work. In 1861, Joanna went to the Rockford Seminary in Illinois, where also Nobel laureate Jane Addams also went. And her main focus was to study and to work and to prepare to go and to be a missionary. Now, during the Civil War, she began to work amongst freed people as a missionary throughout the American Baptist Home Mission Society. On New Year's Day in 1863, Joanna heard that the black man was free, and amidst the cry for joy, she also heard, as she wrote, an undertone of sadness, a cry for help. She saw a need for teaching, for helping. And she had a vision that would not leave her to help the recently freed people in the United States. It was at that moment that she let go of her vision or dream to become a missionary in a foreign land and decided to stay in the United States. And she heard that at the number 10 island, which is an island near Memphis in Tennessee, there were at least 1,000 people in distress, 1,000 recently freed black men, women, and children. And she had no real training and no sense of what she could do, but she heard this message saying, "Go and see, and God will go with you." On December 31st in 1863, Joanna P. Moore was the first woman to be appointed as a missionary to the American Baptist Home Mission Society. And she arrived at the number 10 island, and she had actually not seen many black people in her life and had never spoken to anyone before. But she saw them as people, and she wrote that she learned that you can never help anyone until you love them in the same way that Jesus loves you. And that was the approach that she took towards being present there and being a teacher. And part of Moore's success as a teacher was because of her respect for and utilization of talented black leaders. In 1883, she started Mothers Training Schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. These functioned as model homes for institutions in literacy, homemaking skills, especially for women. And even though she focused on helping women and training women, she considered marriage a partnership and urged husbands to take a greater responsibility in parenting and being present in the home. And her focus on housekeeping and ways of living, what might be described as domestic arts at that time, carried this message of dignity and equality for recently freed black men and women, and specifically women. Her missionary work, her ministry, did not go without controversy and challenge. And she had faced threats from white supremacists. The White League, that's what they called themselves, threatened Moore and black women students in Baton Rouge. On November 20th, in 1890, they received a note demanding that the school in Baton Rouge close. The very next day, the White League brutalized a black minister who supported the work. Violence scared the black community, who fled And this fleeing from the Baton Rouge area caused a labor shortage. One person was killed over this violence. A solution came from what then would have been known as the, quote, good white people, close quotes. And their solution was close the school. Moore saw that the risk of life and the risk of increased violence was so great that she conceded and did close the school. But she did not stop her work and her ministry. She continued to open other schools, to work with men and women, and specifically to be working with women to help with literacy, with education, with being treated and demanding equality in the eyes of everyone they met. Part of the work she did was she formed Bible bands and other forms of Christian education, trying to bring a literacy of the Bible into the homes of people that she reached out to. Moore's legacy could be found in some of the letters that she received from soldiers that she had taught on that island number 10 at the beginning of her ministry. One of them wrote, "Kind teacher, oh, that I could reward you for your great kindness to me and our poor, degraded, and long oppressed people. I know not my future, but wherever it is, I intend you shall hear it, and I also intend that, with the help of God, you shall hear nothing bad of me. Your people have often said that the Negroes could not be made into intelligent people, but I am determined that that shoe shall not fit me. I will try, as you have often told me, to choose for my companions the moral, the sensible, and especially the religious. I do want to be useful in this world and to try to do good to all I meet, whether white or black. I never will, with Jesus to help me, forget the promises I've made to God and to you, to live so on earth that at last I may meet my teacher, who has been my dearest earthly friend, in immortal glory, where parting is no more. Your obedient scholar, George Gaines." Joanna P. Moore was a teacher, and in essence that's all she was a teacher. Something many of us do in public schools or private, as Sunday school teachers, or as just helpers or parents or aunts or uncles or friends or pet people in a church. Just teaching the basics, teaching how to live well, and how to live even better. Just teaching about the gospel, teaching the Bible. But she did it in such an extraordinary time that what was an ordinary act became, in the eyes of God and all those around her, extraordinary. Dear Sir or Madam. Oh, you caught me in the middle of just writing a note. Another ordinary thing that I do all the time. Joanna P. Moore, isn't she amazing? Holy cow! What a life she lived. What a legacy she had. So fantastic. Next, we're going to learn about Virginia Broughton and who she was and what she did in bringing literacy, especially literacy of the Bible, and starting these Bible bands all throughout Tennessee and beyond. So stay tuned, watch and learn about Virginia and just the amazing work she did while I keep writing this strongly worded letter for people who need to hear strong words. I am very upset about... Virginia Broughton was born in 1856. Her father was born a slave but had earned his own freedom and then trained himself to become a lawyer, becoming the first black man to pass the bar exam in Tennessee. Virginia attended Fisk University and was in the first graduating class in 1875. After graduating, she went into teaching at a public school in Memphis, Tennessee. In her time there in Memphis, she got to meet Joanna Moore. She met Moore in the early 1880s, and in learning about her and getting to know her and the work she did, Broughton had an increased interest in missionary work. And she attended many of the meetings that were run by Moore that were just for women. And through her engagement and involvement with Moore and through Moore's influence, she became interested in the participation and in the formation of a black women's society for the study of the Bible. And with Moore's encouragement, she petitioned the Women's Baptist Home Mission Society for a permanent mission station so that she could create and build and grow these schools for black women to study the Bible. In 1887, Virginia Broughton taught in rural districts on weekends as a part of this society. She would travel as far as 50 miles from her house, traveling on ox-drawn wagon or on horseback. And she would go to places that she might not have been welcome, like in Missouri, a place where few like her would have dared to go on, and a woman missionary of no race had ever gone. But she felt compelled to go and to share the gospel, to teach about reading the Bible, and to start these schools, these societies where women would be able to read the Bible. In 1892, the Women's Baptist Home Mission Society appointed Broughton as one of its first black missionaries. In 2 years, the Bible Band, which Broughton was helping to form and start, operated in 57 different places in Tennessee. Now, because of the growth of the Bible Band, Broughton did face criticism and hostility. In part, it was because of just general male hostility towards women, and the idea of a woman going and teaching and starting these things felt intimidating to many men. She was described as having an aggressive and self-confident style, labeled as a, quote, mannish woman, showing a prevalent sexism that Broughton had to face. She faced threats of violence and did face actual violence, but she continued to do her work. And her work set a standard for literacy, especially in the ability to read and interpret the Bible, specifically in rural places. In her time, she written at least 3 books, one 20 years experience of a missionary, another women's work is gleaned from the Bible, and the third biblical women in modern times. And in these works, you see some of the hints towards what we now would describe as womanist and feminist theology. Broughton was ahead of her time. As the National Baptist Convention, a predominantly African-American Baptist group, was formed, Broughton was part of that leadership and a secretary for the National Baptist Convention for some time. And as she continued in her ministry and her influence, she pushed for an emergence of what she would describe as distinctive literature. Really, what she was saying was the African American, the black side of the story of the American experience needed to be shared and told. In a time when the majority of stories that were being told came from a white experience, Broughton was saying there has to be the other side told. Virginia Broughton did face challenges within her own community, pushback within her own community, but she continued to hold firm to the idea that being able to read the Bible and understand the Bible was essential. Like Moore, she was a teacher. That's what she did. And again, that's something that we would look at and say, what is extraordinary about that? We have Bible study teachers, Bible school teachers, Sunday school teachers, but she did it again in an extraordinary time with people who were facing extraordinary challenges. And through Virginia Broughton, 1856 to 1934, we see the extraordinary in the ordinary.
caught me getting ready to do some vacuuming. You got me in the middle of all my ordinary things, and keeping a place clean is really important. Another ordinary thing that I do. Virginia Broughton, though, boy, Sunday school teacher, Bible school teacher, just a person bringing education, and what a difference she made. Absolutely amazing. This isn't right. Okay. Next, we're going to learn about the Reverend Masahiko Wada and the work that he did in the internment camps. Reverend Wada was a pastor, and he may have described himself as nothing more than just a pastor. But the stuff he did, the way he continued to be a pastor, shows again how there is extraordinary in the ordinary. What the? What?
The Reverend Masahiko Wada was born in 1880 and lived to 1957. He was born in Japan and graduated from the Todai University with a law degree, and also from the Baptist Theological Seminary of Yokohama. It was while he was growing and learning in Japan that he did feel this sense of a call to go into missionary work, to go and to serve the gospel throughout the world. And when he went to the Baptist Theological Seminary in Yokohama, that was the focus of his study, to go and to be an evangelist and to share the gospel in all corners of the world. In 1928, he was sponsored by a missionary by the Los Angeles City Mission Society to minister to farm workers in Grove City and Pomona area. The American Baptist Home Mission Society paid to have Wada come to the United States and to serve in those areas. And he did with great success, reaching people reaching people of Japanese descent in that community until 1940. It was in 1940 that Executive Order 9066 was signed, and the Granada Church was closed, and his work in the Pomona Baptist Church was brought into question.
Executive Order 9066 was the order that President Roosevelt signed that ordered the internment of Japanese Americans into camps. Thousands of Japanese American citizens were declared enemy aliens and forced from their homes into these prison camps. Reverend Wada and his wife were included in this group of oppressed people.
In March 13th of 1942, Reverend and Mrs. Wada were taken to the Los Angeles County Jail because of Executive Order 9066, because they were from Japan. And then Reverend Wada was taken to the INS Tuna Canyon Jail and then transferred to Santa Fe, New Mexico, then Lordsburg Department of Justice camp until the end of 1943. His wife did not join him, but was held elsewhere. He was reunited with his wife in 1944 in Crystal City, Texas, before being paroled, and put that in quotes, to the Amachi internment camp in Colorado, where the Wada family and the Hama family and Midori Wright were all being held. Now, for those who don't know, Amachi was an internment camp in Colorado, and there 7,000 Japanese, most of them American cities, were forcibly imprisoned from 1942 to 1945. This is a camp that covered 10,000 acres, but of which only 640 were used for residential, community, and administrative buildings. The rest were used for agriculture. Each person was only allowed to bring in one bag of possessions. The camp was surrounded by barbed wire with 8 machine gun towers, all located around the camp. They were, by all intents and purposes, in a prison. And while he was there, while the Reverend Masahiko Wada was part of that internment at the Amachi camp, he continued to be a pastor. Reverend Wada was a pastor at the Amachi Christian Church, and he visited some of the other Japanese federated churches. He did what pastors do. He preached the gospel. He visited people in need. He prayed with people. he listened to people. It was while he was interred at the Amachi camp that he met the Reverend Emory Andrews. Emory Andrews was a pastor who relocated to Twin Falls, Idaho, so that he could minister to the internees at Amachi and elsewhere. And there must have been something about Reverend Wada's presence that impressed Reverend Andrews, because he was invited to relocate to Reverend Wada was invited to relocate to Seattle after the war. And the American Baptist Home Mission Society arranged for Reverend Wada to visit other internment camps to provide sermons and offer baptisms to continue to be a pastor. It was there that, in these other camps, that he met other people from the Seattle Japanese Baptist Church. When the war had finished, when the executive order was lifted and the Japanese Americans were allowed to return to a semblance of normalcy, Reverend Wada and his family and the Hama family relocated to Seattle, Washington. And Reverend Wada continued to do what he was called to do. He was a senior pastor of the Japanese Baptist Church in Seattle, and he served with Reverend Emory Andrews until he retired in 1955. We all know pastors. We know the work they do, and it's good work. It is day-to-day kind of work. And that's the work that Reverend Wada did. But he did it under oppression. He did it in imprisonment. He did it in extraordinary times. And what others might see as just ordinary action became extraordinary.
What an amazing legacy, just to continue to be a pastor in such a stressful place as the internment camp. Reverend Wada really was an extraordinary person, doing ordinary things, but in extraordinary times. I hope that you take away from this how, by doing what we may think are just ordinary things, we're actually going above and beyond. That God can use our actions, even if we think it's really nothing to it. But those extraordinary things become extraordinary when we stay true to God's call. When we just keep doing the things that we think God wants us to do. You've seen me doing ordinary things. I've got nothing much to talk about. But I hope you leave here looking for those ways that God can bring out the extraordinary in you. And you can do extraordinary things in all times. Now I am going to get the mail.